Thank you for joining us online here at Fam Church as we start our new series, HomeFront. If you haven't already, please click subscribe button below to subscribe to our YouTube channel and go out to Facebook at facebook.com/famchurch and give us a like. And now, our lead pastor, Brian Lane.
All right, so we're starting a new message series. This new message series is called Homefront. And what we're going to talk about in Homefront is relationships, okay? And I think that even if you don't even believe in Jesus today and you're sitting in here, that the words, the message that we have, the series that we have is going to be incredibly helpful for you in your life. It's going to give us the tools. The big idea of this series is to give us the tools that we need to operate within relationships here on this earth, okay? Most aspects of our life come down to our ability to relate to other people, our ability to connect with other people. And relationships are really becoming a lost art form because people consider friends on Facebook and talking to people on Facebook and commenting on pictures on Instagram and saying and watching videos or whatever on Snapchat, they consider that being in a relationship. That's not really a relationship, okay? And so if we do not know how to function properly with an actual human being that's standing in front of our face, it creates problems for us. So in this series, we're going to look at relationships in general, and then we're going to narrow our focus down. We're going to have a week for men. We're going to have a week for women. And I am doing the women one, the woman one, but I'm going to get advice from some women who are here at church. And so it won't be me coming up here and saying, this is what women want you to know. It'll be actually coming from women, but I will deliver the message. Then we're going to be talking about relationship between husband and wives. And then the last week is going to be between parents and children. And I feel that this series is really important because the quality of our lives is really only as good as the quality of our relationships. If we have strained relationships with our friends, with our neighbors, with our coworkers, with our children or our spouse or anyone else, really, it robs us of quality of life. And so that's what we're looking at in this message. Now, in saying all of that, I'm not saying that I'm going to teach you how to live a life that is conflict-free in relationships. Can I tell you that is not a possibility? It's never going to happen. There's no way around us and around it. And I think all of us have been there. We've all had conflicts in relationships that we've had, regardless of who it is. You know, I've had many conflicts in relationships. One of my favorite, or this is one of my favorite stories because it made me feel like I was like, anyways, I'll tell you the story. Okay, so in the neighborhood I grew up in, there were lots of kids. Okay, we had kids running all over the place, and all the boys would get together and we would play sports. I mean, that was the thing that we did. We'd get together. We played mostly football, but we would play baseball. We would sometimes play basketball. We would play hockey. My dad built 2 hockey goals for us to put in the driveway so that we could play hockey. To make hockey more interesting, we would... there's no kids in here, right? We would soak the tennis ball that we played hockey with in gasoline and light it on fire and play with a flaming tennis ball, okay? That's what we did. And so I was goalie a lot of the time, and so playing goalie with a flaming tennis ball was a little scary, but it was fun, all right? But we'd play soccer, volleyball. I mean, you name the sport, we'd be out there playing it. Well, this one day, all of the neighborhood kids got together, and we decided we were going to play a game of baseball. And so I was on one team, and we had this other team, and this kid came, and he showed up, and I'd never seen this kid before, and I'd lived in that neighborhood most of my life. I had no idea where he came from. And so he shows up, and he wants to play baseball with us, and so we put him on a team. Well, this kid wasn't very good at baseball, but he had one gift. It was running his mouth. Okay, this kid could talk trash nonstop. That was his spiritual gift, I believe, was talking trash. He knew how to talk trash. Okay, and so he was just run, I mean, the whole time. It didn't matter if he was up to bat or somebody else was up to bat or whatever. He was just running his mouth, running his mouth, running his mouth. And it got very irritating. And I happened to be the pitcher for our team. And so every time I threw a ball, whether it was a strike or a ball, a foul ball, a fly ball, a hit, he had something to say about it. Well, it started getting on my nerves. I started to get really aggravated. Now, one of the gifts that I had when I was a kid was I could throw a ball really good, okay? I could throw a baseball really well. That's why I was the pitcher, and I could throw a football really well. Those were the that was one thing that I could do really good was throw a ball. And so I'm the pitcher, And I'm thinking, how am I going to shut this kid up? So in between innings one time, one of the neighbors had an apple tree in his yard. So I see an apple, and I picked the apple off, and I stuck it in my glove, and I went out to pitch. I just had the apple sitting in my glove, and I was throwing the baseball, and then he came up to bat. Well, what's the best way to get someone to stop talking? You put something in their mouth, right? And so I put this apple in my glove, and my goal with the apple was not to throw it and pitch it at him and have him swing the bat and the apple explode everywhere. My goal was to take that apple and put it directly in the kid's mouth. So he stepped up to bat. I grabbed that apple, and I threw that thing so hard, he never even saw it coming. It hit him directly in the mouth. It exploded. And he dropped to the ground, screaming and crying. He stood up. He had blood. I'm laughing at it. I know I'm a terrible person, right? He had blood running from his mouth, and he just jumped up and he ran home screaming. Well, our baseball game didn't last too much longer after this because the other team was mad at me for beating their player in the mouth. Our team was mad because their team never stopped him from talking trash because he was just running his mouth the whole time. And so our baseball game broke up, but that wasn't the end of it. We had conflict. We had parents showing up at our house, ringing the doorbell, telling my mom and dad what a bully I was for beating their kid in the face with an apple. And we had drama amongst the friends and all kinds of strained relationships over me pitching this apple into this kid's face. There were relationship problems all over the place. And disruptions in relationships are something that happens on a regular basis. They happen all the time in life. Now, we don't usually throw an apple at somebody's face when we get into a disrupted relationship, but maybe there's that person at work who sits in the cubicle next to you, and they tell everybody that, you know what, the only reason your team is even functional, the only reason your team is any good is because they were there doing all the work. And if they quit, if they left, if they weren't there doing all the work, the team would fall apart. They wouldn't be as successful as they are. And you sit there, you and your coworkers sit there, and you hear this person talking, and it ticks you off, right? It breaks down a relationship. Or maybe it's the neighbor who doesn't cut his grass and edge and lets his dog roam the neighborhood using everyone else's yard for its bathroom. The strained relationship with your neighbor. It could be the in-law that is always sticking their nose in your family's business and fighting against you in family decisions. I was waiting for Dana to say amen. My mom is... Let's not put that on the internet. We just had a conversation about it last night. That's why Okay, it could be fighting and arguing between you and your children. It could be fighting and arguing between you and your spouse because of money, your kids because of a curfew, because of a boyfriend or girlfriend, or any of the other things that we argue about within our families. Relationships get strained. And so the deal this morning is our message is called Training for Battle. And that's what we are going to engage in today. We are going to train. We're going to talk about how to operate in relationships in general, and knowing how to live, knowing how to operate in relationships in general trains us, prepares us for handling those other relationships. It trains us how to handle relationships between us and our kids. It trains us how to handle relationships between us and our spouse. It trains us how to handle relationships between us and our coworkers. It prepares us. And we're going to look at some principles found in the Bible and Jesus gives us for basic training to prepare how to operate in all of our relationships. And knowing that the relationship that you have with the McDonald's drive-thru operator can help prepare you for how you have a relationship with your spouse or your children at home. Now, whenever you talk about relationships, you'll usually find the one person in the room, or there's maybe a few people in the room that are like, I don't need this. You know why? Because I really don't need people. I'm an independent person. I really don't have to be in relation to anyone whatsoever. I can do it all myself. I don't need a spouse. I don't need friends. I don't need family. I don't need anyone. I got this on my own. I've got two answers for that. One is a practical answer, and then the second answer is going to come from the Bible. And the practical answer goes like this. Okay, you're independent. This is what I'm going to do. Okay, I'm going to go ask you to go buy a piece of land maybe outside the Florida Everglades, or if you like living in the mountains, I'll allow you to live in the mountains of Georgia or Tennessee or something like that. Buy a piece of land. After you buy that piece of land, you cannot interact with any other human being. You have to do this completely independently, establish your life. So what does that mean? Well, that means you got to build a house by yourself. So that means you need to cut down some trees. That means you need to make some boards. That means you need to get some lumber together to build a house. And you'll be saying, I can do that. Okay, well, here's the challenge. You have to make all of the tools that you use in order to build the house, because you can't use tools that somebody else made. You know why? You're being dependent on them to do what you need to do. And so you got to so that means you're going to have to dig down and find some metal and purify the metal and make it into saws and make it into tools and make it in the equipment you need in order to cut down the trees to build the house. And we could keep going along this line. You know, you're going to have to plant your own crops. That means you're going to have to go out and find your own seeds. You're not going to be able to depend on anyone else like Walmart to go down and buy some seeds in order to grow your crops. You're going to have to hunt your seeds. You're going to have to plant your crops. You're going to have to harvest your crops, all without help from anyone else. You want a vehicle? You want a tractor to plow that? Build it yourself. Find the metal out of the ground. Build that tractor. Refine your own fuel, find some gasoline, find some oil, refine it into gasoline. You want to hunt some animals? Oh, you're going to have to make that gun, make the bullets. And I know some of you are saying, all right, you're being an idiot right now. No one can do that. That's exactly the point I'm trying to make. See, in order for us to survive here on this earth, we need help from people. We need to be in relationship with other people. There's no way that we can do life completely and totally independent from someone else. Even those people that you see on the TV shows that go off into the Alaskan wilderness to be out there by themselves depend on other people. They don't make their own guns. They don't make their own bullets. They don't make their own fishing line. They don't make their own vehicles. They depend on people for the things that they need. That's just the way life is. So you're going to need to be able to operate in healthy relationships with others, because all of our life we're going to have to depend on and live in relationship with others in some way, shape, or form. That's the practical point. The second thing I would say comes from Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, and it says this. It says, "The Lord God said, 'It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him.'" And if you don't have a Bible, that's okay. We're going to put all of our verses up here on the screen. You don't need to worry about that. But you look at this, and some of you may have heard that verse and said, well, that's talking about a man and a wife, him getting a spouse, and that's what that is there. That's about marriage. No, it doesn't say anything about marriage in that verse. It doesn't talk about Adam needing a wife. It says, it was not good for the man to be alone. Okay? It's not a good thing for us to be alone. He's not saying it is bad if a man does not get married. He's not even saying it's bad if a man does not have sex. That's not what's here in this text. He's saying that he did not create us as people to live independent of one another. He created us as people to live interdependent with one another, in relationship to one another, connected to one another. If we try to live apart, if we try to live separated from others in relationship, we are not living the way God intended for us to live. It was God's plan from the beginning for us to live in relationship. But why people decide relationships aren't worth it is because of the conflict, But everything in life has conflict with it, even relationships. In every one of our marriages, there is conflict at some point in time between the husband and the wife. In every family, there's conflict at some point in time between the parents and their children. At every place of employment, your coworkers are going to do things that annoy you and put a strain on your relationship with them. Our in-laws, by nature, are going to butt into our marriage and into our business. We can't avoid these things. We can't get around these things. We've got this idea that we can live life free of conflict, but we cannot. The only way you're going to live without conflict is if you're dead. I mean, even if we're to, that new movie that's out, The Martian. Some of you may be thinking, well, I could go live on Mars, and then be completely independent. Well, if we didn't have anyone else around to get in conflict with, we'd get in conflict with ourselves. Seriously, have you seen the movie Castaway? Tom Hanks got into a fight with a volleyball. Okay? We find things to be in conflict with. It's just part of who we are. That means we have to learn to navigate conflicts in relationships. So we're going to look at 2 New Testament verses that will help us navigate conflicts in relationships. And the first one that we're going to look at is found in the book of Romans, chapter 12, verse 18. And we've talked about Romans a couple of previous messages, and we discovered through our discussion there that a guy named Paul wrote this book called Romans. And we've mentioned many things about the life of Paul in our discussions and our look into this letter to the Roman church. But one thing that we haven't talked about is that Paul's life was really marked by relational conflict. I'm going to describe some conflicts he had without reading the text just for time's sake, but all of what I'm going to mention is found in the book of Acts in the New Testament. And so I challenge you to go home and read the book of Acts, start in chapter 7 and read to the end, and you'll find most of these conflicts. But when we first meet Paul, his name is Saul, okay? He's not a Christian. He doesn't like Christians. Matter of fact, he's killing Christians, okay? He's going around trying to arrest and trying to kill Christians. So the Christians don't have any trust in him. There is no relationship there. Because of what he's doing, because of how he's behaving, Christians are afraid of him. And there was definite conflict between Paul and the Christian. If we were to turn to Acts chapter, I believe it's chapter 9, where he's supposed to go to a guy in Damascus. God comes to the guy and says, hey, I got Paul. He's coming over to your house. The guy says, hold on, bro. Don't send that man here. He's crazy. He's going to try and kill me. Okay? And so there was conflict before he was a Christian. Okay? And then once he became a Christian, all of the Christians didn't trust him because he tried to kill them before. But then on top of that, he had all of the people that he was with before, his homies from before, they wanted him dead now too. And so nobody liked Paul. The Christians didn't like Paul. The Jews didn't like Paul. Paul was just Paul, and he was holding on, and he had all of this relationship conflict going on. Okay, just all kinds of it. Well, that kind of dies down. But then a little bit later in the book of Acts, Paul is hooked up with this dude named Barnabas, and they're going out to do ministry. Okay, and Paul and Barnabas get into a fight, it says. They get into a disagreement. Okay, it was such a sharp disagreement that it says they were torn apart. And the word there that's torn apart is the same word that they use in Revelation for the sky being ripped open. So it was a pretty violent disagreement. I don't know if they got into a fist fight. I'm not saying they were throwing down or anything like that. But they got into a fight, and it was so bad that Paul and Barnabas never did ministry together again. He got into a public argument with Peter. If you read the book of Galatians, he talks about the public argument he got into with Peter, and he once made a whole city so mad, they stoned him and dragged him out of the city thinking he was dead. I mean, it takes a special person to tick a whole city off. You know what I'm saying? And there were many more. But in and through all of this, Paul gives this piece of advice in Romans 12:18. He says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. As far as it depends on us, live at peace. This is the first key in healthy relationships. Okay? When relationships are strained, the first place that we need to look to resolve the issue is not with the other person. It's with ourselves. Paul says, as it depends on you. And I know people are saying, but you don't understand. They were such a jerk. You don't understand what I'm going through with them. Well, you know what? Jesus doesn't allow us to say he was such a jerk. She was such a jerk. Jesus says to look on the inside and see where we have screwed this thing up. Because in every relationship breakdown, a piece of it's ours. We own a piece of that breakdown. Not only do we need to own the part we have caused, but we need to see what we can do to fix the part that we have caused, to bring peace into the situation. This means we need to have empathy for people. We need to be able to look at the world through their eyes, see how they are seeing things, and be able to say, oh, I get that. I understand why they're mad. I didn't see that. I didn't connect that. So that when we see that, we can own our piece of the problem. Now, you may be saying, well, how does this look? How does this work? And how does this happen in real life? Well, I'll tell you, just a couple of weeks ago, in dealing with the fallout from the whole Rob's situation, Dana tried to make me feel better. Okay, she was on Facebook reading me all of the posts that were out there that were criticizing the church, that were making me look like I was unjust in what I did, and there was a whole bunch of untrue statements about what had happened, and I had already felt terrible about what happened. I mean, I was literally sick for a week because of what happened, and so her reading the comments continually frustrated me and just got me more and more and more angry, until finally it just pushed me over the edge, and I told her, I don't want to hear about that anymore. Stop reading me those posts. But see, I didn't understand what she was trying to do. See, I thought she was intentionally trying to keep this thing sitting there by constantly talking about it. I said, I already feel bad enough. I don't need you to make me feel worse. And she left for work that day with both of us ticked off. But about an hour later, she texted me to apologize. See, she thought that what she was doing was going to help me feel better about what happened, and never thought that it was going to make me feel worse. She put herself in my spot, saw how what she did played a role in the conflict, and apologized for it. I mean, was that all her fault? No, it wasn't all her fault. I mean, instead of getting upset, instead of getting mad, instead of getting frustrated, I could have stopped and told her, hey, I don't really want to hear about that anymore, but instead I just got mad, but this is what this verse is telling us to do when we have relationship breakdowns. Look at the conflict, see what part we played in causing the breakdown, and use that to help bring peace to the situation. Now, does this mean that every time we take ownership of a conflict, of a problem, it will all work itself out? No. But as long as we are doing what's in our power to do, we can have peace that we handled the breakdown right, that we handled it correctly. So the first point is to take ownership of our part and do what we can to fix it. The second piece of advice that Paul gives us in relationships comes from the letter he wrote to the Ephesians. And this was a letter he wrote to the church in the city of Ephesus. Ephesus, a very wealthy city in Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey. We've talked about this city a couple of times. It was large, fairly wealthy city. It was home to one of the first mega churches. The first mega church was in Jerusalem, but by the time we got to about 60 AD, this was the largest church in the world. And so Paul was writing a letter to the church, and most of the letters he wrote to the churches, it was kind of to resolve the conflicts and the problems and the issues that were going on in that church. But this one, there seemed to be no conflicts or issues. Paul, in this letter, was more speaking to where the church was going, a vision for the ministry that the church was doing. And so in this whole thing, Paul brought in interpersonal relationships and how they should work out, how they should relate, how they should be handled. And that's where we get our verse from in Ephesians 5:21. And it says this. It says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And this is one of those verses that makes a fully functioning member of the culture here in the United States of America say, bruh, are you serious? Are you serious? I mean, why would I say that? Well, because submitting to others is something that turns us off, right? We don't like the thought of submitting to others. Instead, it makes us want to throw up in our mouth a little bit, right? Because we don't want to submit to anyone. I mean, look at all the superheroes out there. Has anyone become a superhero by submitting to others? No, nobody's ever become a superhero doing that. It's the superhero is always the one that says, you know what, I'm not going to take your crap, and I'm going to take you down, and I'm going to take you out. I mean, Captain America. I love the two Captain America movies. I'm a Captain America fan. But Captain America became who he was, partially because of genetic engineering, but partially because the guy who was in charge of that base that they were at was telling him, you know what, you just need to go out and do your little song and dance number and don't worry about the war. Leave it to us real soldiers. And Captain America said, my friend is in a prison behind enemy lines, and I'm not going to stand there and take that. I'm not going to submit to your stupid orders. Instead, I'm going to go out by myself, and I'm going to take that prison and get all my friends back. And that's exactly what he did. And we look at that and we go, yeah, don't submit to that stupid colonel. He didn't know what he was talking about. You know, and when you think of submitting, you think of stuff like Britain and France with Hitler before World War II. They submitted to Hitler and he basically took over all of Europe from them. They laid down and Hitler walked over them. That's not what Jesus is communicating in this verse. It's not about being a doormat. It's also not about us being really polite and nice to each other. You know, we get this impression that you're Christian, you got to be nice. Because what happens is we get so concerned about being nice to each other that we get nowhere because we don't want to step on someone else's toes. Sometimes toes need to get stepped on. But see, that's what we picture when we hear the word submit. It's a sign of weakness. It's a sign that we are not confident. It's a picture that most of us don't want to paint. And that's good because that's not the picture that Paul is asking us to paint, that Jesus is asking us to paint with this verse either. The picture that they're trying to paint is where we put others first, where we model our lives out of what Jesus modeled and live it out by thinking about and putting others first before ourselves. Lewis, if you want to come on back up, you may be saying to yourself, well, if I put everyone else first, aren't I going to be walked over? No, the idea being communicated in this verse is one where it's not just me thinking of you first and you just doing everything you want to do, but it's about us mutually looking at each other and saying to each other, what can I do to serve you? What can I do to submit to you? And see, if both people in a party are saying to each other, you know what? Jesus came, Jesus submitted, Jesus served. And so that's what I'm going to do to people too. It's going to dramatically change how we relate to each other. Because we're going to be looking at each other and saying, you know what? You're as important as I am. And I want to do what I can for you to serve you and show you who Jesus is. And see, then as we do that, we build a relationship and suddenly we're looking out for others first rather than always looking out for ourselves. And you know what? When we do that, the conflicts that we see in relationships don't happen as much when we're thinking about serving each other rather than saying, what can I get out of this? And it helps to break down and reduce the amount of conflict in a relationship. But see, when conflicts do arise, if we have the attitude, if we have the heart that we are going to serve each other, that we are here to serve each other, the conflict will be able to be resolved much easier. And so that's where we start in relationships and in conflict. When we're in conflict, we got to look at the conflict and say, hey, what part of this is mine? What chunk of this do I own? And take care of the chunk of the piece that you own. And then once you've taken care of the piece that you own, submit. Just say, you know what? Jesus came and served, and so I'm going to serve you in this relationship. And if both people have that attitude, especially here in the church, us who follow Jesus, if we are saying to one another that we're going to follow Jesus and submit to each other, we're going to see a whole lot more Jesus in this place, a whole lot less conflict. And we're going to see God doing bigger and greater things. But see, if all we care about is winning the argument, is coming out saying, ha, I won, there's not going to be any healing. There's not going to be any restoration. There's not going to be anything good that comes out of that relationship. So let's do our part and let's submit to one another as we live in relationship with one another. You know, parents and kids, yes. Look, find out when there's conflict what your part is and submit to one another. Husbands and wives, friends, do this thing, and we're going to see God do something greater in our relationships.
I really hope you enjoyed that message from our series Homefront. If you did, please click the like button below and let us know. And if you have any questions about anything here at Fam Church, you can go out to myfamchurch.com and check us out there. And thank you once again for joining us online at Fam Church.